Board of Education. If you'll please stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Review of the agenda. Would someone like to make a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye. Public comment? Sorry, Mr. Casey, I just look at you like you're... Thank you. Student support services, consider approval of standard form of agreement between owner, Clark County Board of Education, and contractor thermal equipment sales for the Shear HVAC renovation. Project BG 22-226. Board Superintendent Goal 8. Mr. Stump.
Good evening. In continuation of our discussion from last board member meeting regarding the proposal from the architects and engineers for expansion of the geothermal well at Shear. What we've done this afternoon is to invite your architect engineers here. Josh Carroll from Schrott Tate Wilson is here to go over the report that was generated. He and his team were part of the assessment of that geothermal field. He can answer any questions or guide you through any of the findings of that assessment. And also we have the contractors here for the project, Thermal Sales, who can address any questions that you may have as well. So just to recoup very briefly, the proposal on the table is to expand the geothermal well by 46 additional wells, 350 feet deep, at a cost of about $400,000. So you have in your hands a copy of the current BG1 that's already been approved for the project at $2.1 million. You have a copy of the proposed without the geothermal well, and then you have a copy of the proposed with the geothermal well expansion. And you can see from those copies what the proposed total figures would be given the choice of either with or without geothermal well expansion. And to remind you, this project is proposed being funded with your ESSER funds.
So the other night when we were talking about this, we were talking about with the geothermal expansion, and that would give us extra life for 20 plus years.
Yeah, the equipment is typically expected to last the longevity of about 22 years. Our current system's 22 years. If the geothermal field is working as it should be, we would expect at least that long with the new equipment. Any water temperatures that exceed 70, 80 degrees could shorten the life of the new equipment that we're installing currently at Shear. But we did get 22 years out of the current equipment, so it's hard to say that it would shorten, you know. But as the architects will attest, we really believe, looking at the blueprints, that the system was undersized when it was built back in 92. It was about 40 tons short from what should have been given the specs of the equipment that went into that building. So that's kind of what we're trying to recoup now. It's actually about 80 tons with the new geothermal wells, but 40 of those tons was because it was undersized. That's the theory.
So when they tested the water temperature, what was it? It was almost at 90, wasn't it?
90, and on some days it was over 100. And when you get over 100, it starts throwing breakers and the systems start shutting down. But they've improved the flow of the rate flow of the geothermal well. It's brought it down in the upper 80s at sometimes, but idealistically you want that water temperature in the 70s, low 80s.
So with this expansion, would that help that?
Absolutely. So you want to reference that?
Yes. So I'm Josh with Schrott Tate Wilson.
Hi, Josh.
If we add the additional wells, you will get better performance. So our brief recommendation, just to recap, is that we add the wells to get the temperatures down to where they need to be. You have the option to not do that now, but you run the risk of overheating your well field and causing problems with the new equipment. The only other option beyond that is to add a cooling tower, which adds a whole lot more maintenance and upkeep that I don't think anyone in the district wants to pick up.
So we've been talking about the HVAC this year for several meetings, for several months. Why is it now that we're just finding out that we need tanks?
Well, we got to the point
replaced?
where it became an emergent situation.
Because it's been 2.1 million for months. Then last meeting was like the first meeting that I recall anyway, that, hey, now we need to add geothermal
Right.
tanks.
Well, up until that point, the engineers thought that we could flush the system and mitigate it and bring that water temperature down and not have to add that. We really felt that we wouldn't have to add the additional wells, but after their assessment, they found that that wasn't doable. So that's when it became an issue.
With the flushing, did it help? Because it looks like there was a lot of dirt buildup just in all the pipes.
It did help, yes.
Okay.
But there hasn't been a flush procedure done. There was some maintenance on the strainers that helped the flow. So now we're flowing the right flow rate through the geo well field, which helps with the heat exchange. But there hasn't been a flush procedure to clean the whole system out yet. Only locally there's a strainer in the system. And there's probably 60 of those strainers present.
Right.
So a flush hasn't happened, but we are also recommending a flush. And sorry, I'm Jay with Home Improvement Sales. So I'd like to also go back to your question, sir, about why we're just now talking about this. We actually had, from the beginning, when we budgeted the job in November, Tate Wilson did, there was a recommendation to consider either a geo well field expansion or a cooling tower to turn it into a hybrid, because just theoretically, based on the calculations of the existing well field and the tonnage that was in the school at the time, the capacity, the well field Josh saw was short, and there was concerns. Also, we saw the elevated temperatures from our first site visit and the first site report. So if you go back to November, we talked about concerns over the geo well field, but I felt personally like we could clean it up and make it work. And I was hoping that we wouldn't have to incur this extra cost. But when it came down, we've had another thing, talking about the budget, is over since last November, when we initially budgeted this to now, if you guys would recall, I did a presentation about price escalations, not just on the equipment, but also labor and materials. The price of everything, you guys have seen, has escalated tremendously since last November. We've seen equipment price increases of 25 to 30% alone. So with the increase of all the materials that goes into this job, along with the labor, and having to now, we came down to this last month and said, let's go and do the investigation to make sure, yes, you're gonna need this, or no, you're not. And once we did all the testing and cleaning, we found that, yeah, if you don't do this, not only is it a risk of reducing the life of the new equipment, but there's a risk that the new equipment won't function. If this well field continues to go in the direction it is, these elevated temperatures will cause the equipment to trip out. So when you're getting into the late spring and early fall, if the temperatures are elevated that much, the equipment will be able to operate, and it'll safety trip. And we'll have to reset units, and you'll lose air conditioning in classrooms. I don't want that experience. It's just not the right way to do the project. So, and unfortunately, one of the other things that have gone skyrocketed since last November is also the price of geo well field drilling. During the COVID times, we've had, I think, I heard of 2 to 4 well field companies went out of business here in Kentucky. And then with that, and the cost of labor going up, and they're now using prevailing wage funds, which I don't think was included in the original budget either. I'm sure at that time we knew that you had to do prevailing wage adjustment funds. All that was just caused the price to go up. So now if we do the well field, we're gonna exceed that 2.1 that was also budgeted. And we had to add, our first bid, the recommended amount was 36 well fields. After we did the study, cleaned what we could, increase the flow rate, and now we're into summer, we can see exactly what that well field is projecting from the building, the heat. We see that actually 36 wasn't enough, so we had to add an additional 10 to make up for that deficit. And part of that deficit, we talked about 40 tons being short at the first. Initially, we feel like it was undersized initially, but then with the debris that has accumulated inside, that reduces the efficiency of that well field. And also 22 years of pumping heat into the ground in that location causes degradation in the ability to reject heat in that particular area. So that well field performance is going to drop over the 22 years, and that's normal for that to happen. So we've figured out now, 4 weeks ago or so, when we concluded our investigation, that we've lost, I think, 40 tons. We've lost 40 tons of capacity over 22 years, and we were 40 tons short to begin with. So there's 187 tons, I think, this is all in the report, of actual capacity of units installed in the school now. We're only able to get 106 tons into the well field system. That's what we are.
I appreciate that. What's the lead time on the wells?
That was a good question. The last time I asked, they were still able to get them done this summer. I asked again about a week ago. There was a question whether or not they could get them done this summer. So I don't have that answer, but as of about 3 weeks ago, they said they could.
I don't think they would be able to finish all 46 wells before getting to the school.
Yeah.
You can, on average, depending on the number, they have two drill rigs on site. They can get about 6 wells per day. If they only have one on site, they're going to average about 30.
You've got anything that can foster about 8 tons that you could get back to them. I think the well for the application has to be clear.
Where's the wells manufactured and shipped from?
The wells are just pipes.
Okay.
It's just the labor of drilling.
Okay. Thought there was,
We can
So-
get the pipe material.
Yeah.
That's not the problem.
it's the labor part of it?
It's the equipment.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And so at the beginning of school, Shear would continue to work on the system that's in place.
Yes, yeah.
They wouldn't be without
Correct.
anything while this would be going on.
But our highest demand months are August, September, and we've already seen some 100-degree water temperature in that well, so you'd have to really be careful and watch it closely.
The question was asked, what were the well field temperatures? In one of the reports, it's documented, but I want to say it was 95 degrees. Before we increased the flow rate. Once we got the flow rate up, I think we were able to drop about 3 degrees off of it, or 4, but not much. So
Not much.
we're still in the 90-degree range now, and we're just going to stimulate more heat.
So Steve just went over to Shear and just reported that it's 86 going out, 82 coming back. So we have seen some improvement from the
Right, but there's no children.
And that was our discussion last
Yes.
board meeting, you know, we
There's
still
no
have,
demand right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we still have to flush the lines,
Yeah.
which will improve it, and we still have variable drives to put in it, which will improve it.
And that was a discussion that I had with Donald last week, that there was some concern about the increased cost and whether or not we could limp along till next summer and do another geothermal project next year. And that would be probably a risk that you could take, but you may run into a problem where the loop temperatures are too high once cooling season starts next year.
So if it was running optimal, what would be the temperature?
In the 70s, the optimal is going to be anywhere from 68 to 78. That's the ideal temperature that you want.
So we're 10 degrees off,
Yeah.
you know,
Still.
but we're not in high demand month.
Right.
Another thing to consider with the current well temps is we have the kitchen unit turned off. I think both of the gym units might be turned off right now, and several of the flashing units.
Yeah, and we don't have kids in the building,
Right.
which
No
you noted
kids in
earlier was an issue too, and it is.
Any more questions or discussion?
I make a motion to approve the standard form of agreement between Clark County Board of Ed and the contractor thermal equipment sales for the HVAC renovation project.
With the proposed
With the
expansion.
proposed geothermal expansion.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Closed session. Do I have a motion, to adjourn to closed session?
I'll make that motion.
Per KRS 61.810, discussion or hearings which might lead to the appointment, discipline, or dismissal of an individual employee, member, or student. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? Motion carries 4-0. We're in closed session at 6:46.